Good afternoon, and welcome to the June California Nevada Drought Early Warning System Drought and Climate Outlook Webinar. Thank you for those that have joined us previously and those who may be joining us for the first time. My name is Amanda Sheffield, and I am the Regional Drought Information Coordinator for NOAA's National Integrated Drought Information System, or commonly referred to as NIDIS, in California, Nevada, and I'm affiliated with the Cooperative Institute for Research and Environmental Sciences at CU Boulder. This webinar is co-hosted with the California and Nevada Adaptation Program, a NOAA RESA team. We provide these bi-monthly webinar series designed to provide the region with timely information on current drought status and associated impacts, as well as a preview of developing climatic events. Before we get started, please note that this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available on drought.gov and our YouTube channel later this week. We've got a great set of speakers this week covering a recap of the water year, as well as the wildland fire potential outlook for California and Nevada. Before we get started, I just want to take a couple minutes to introduce NIDIS to those who may not be as familiar with us and with our program and our partners. Our mission is to improve the nation's capacity to proactively manage drought-related risk by providing those affected with the best available information and resources to assess the potential for drought and to better prepare for, mitigate, and respond to the effects of drought. We work to improve our understanding of how and why drought affects society, the economy, and the environment, and to improve accessibility, dissemination, and use of early warning information for drought risk management. We fulfill this mandate by building a national drought early warning system, or DEWS, through advancing regional drought early warning systems, as seen on the map here being California, Nevada, of course, and we work with new and existing networks of federal, tribal, state, local, and academic partners to make climate and drought science accessible and useful for decision making. This means we provide information on drought conditions and impacts. We share this through the regional DEWS networks, as well as through the U.S. Drought Portal, which is drought.gov. I'll also mention that NIDIS is celebrating its 20th anniversary this year, and so we'll have quite a few different news articles and other information coming out this year about NIDIS. Just a quick reminder for those who maybe aren't on our listservs or are interested in how to find more information about our webinars. This is just a snapshot from the top of drought.gov where you can find the latest news, upcoming webinars, events, and past webinar recaps, such as this one. You can sign up for our email listservs. You can sign up for regional drought status updates. You can sign them up by region, national newsletters, all kinds of things if you're interested. And just a few quick announcements. I did want to mention a couple different things in case you're interested. NIDIS, in our collaboration with CERES, which I mentioned is the Cooperative Institute for Research and Environmental Sciences at CU Boulder, we are currently hiring. We do have a position for a regional drought information coordinator, and we're looking for someone with experience in the Western United States. You can go to the QR code there to find more information. And we also are hiring a digital communications coordinator, and this person will strategize and implement web-based communications through drought.gov. And you can find more information on the QR code there. The upper position's been open for just a little bit and will be open for a little bit longer, whereas the other position opened just today, if that helps you figure out a timeline for checking those out. And then on the right side here, I wanted to mention a project that we've been working with the National Weather Service for several years, and that includes redesigning with social sciences and decision science the monthly and seasonal drought outlooks provided by the National Weather Service Climate Prediction Center. We've been working on this project with them for quite a while, and at this point now you can provide public comment on the redesign. Here's an example from the redesign off the webpage, which you can find at the QR code there, and you can check them out there to see if you'd like to provide comment on the proposed redesign of those. As we go through presentations, we'll go through both our presenters and do most of the questions at the end, but I do want to tell you where you're able to submit those questions. If you're in the browser version of WebEx, you want to click on Apps, and then type and send your question here under Slido. And then the app as well, you'll also find Slido. So you'll click Slido, not apps there, and type in your question and send it to us there as well. With that, I'll go ahead and get started with our presentations. As I said, enter your questions as you think of them as they're presented along the way. And our first presenter is going to be Mike Hittle. He's with the NOAA's National Weather Service California Nevada River Forecast Center, and he's going to do a recap of the water year for us. And Mike, I'll go ahead and stop sharing and let you go ahead. Mike, you're muted if you're talking.
Wasn't quite yet, but just getting my presentation going. All right. Hi, I'm Mike Hittle. I'm a hydrologist with the California-Nevada River Forecast Center, and I'm going to start with just a bit of a review, and some of this will be further review from when I last presented in March. We entered 2026 with some relatively good conditions. On the left is the December 25th issuance of the Drought Monitor. We've got some small areas of abnormally dry near San Diego and far northern interior California, and that's a little bit more widespread in Nevada. And then on the right, we've got the percent of average year-to-date precipitation for October through December of 2025. It was extremely wet fall for the transverse ranges and up into the northern Mojave, with some very dry conditions along the far north coast, the upper Klamath River Basin, San Diego Mountains, and a lot of northern Nevada. If we break it down a little bit further, that period ranks in the top third of wettest years for most of the region. The numerical values you see there show how this past October through December ranks as far as the wettest in the last 131 years. Regions displayed here simplify things a bit. Remember on the last slide, there were plenty of dry portions in the mountains east of San Diego. Still, with the January 8th issuance of the Drought Monitor, we see dry conditions trimmed back significantly in Nevada and completely removed from California. However, we were already beginning to get concerned about the state of the snowpack. Pictured are the basins in which CNRFC models the water equivalent of accumulated snow, with a few exceptions along the highest elevations in the Southern Sierra and isolated places in Northern California. We were well below the year-to-date average on January 1st. And this is now a progression of SWE beginning on Valentine's Day, when every region across the state with daily reporting snow pillows was below 50% of April 1st average. The accumulations over the next 10 days brought the southern regions up around 70% of normal, but the northern regions and central Nevada still lacked. The Humboldt and Klamath River basins were especially dry at less than 40% of normal, and unfortunately that's about as good as it got. In late February, we saw some very warm temperatures associated with an atmospheric river that was especially prominent in the north. And then as you have record warmth in mid-March as you begin to see the melt accelerate at an alarming rate. By April 1st, our historical peak date, all but the central and southern Sierra are below 10% of average. And we did get a little more snow in April, but it did very little in the grand scheme. Southern Sierra were already below 20% of the April 1st normal and stayed there even with the new accumulations. The Central Sierra briefly came back above 20%, and every other region stayed below 10. By May 1st, every region was below 20% of normal. By month, the water year started out very promising. As I mentioned earlier, big portions of California especially received more than 250% of monthly average precipitation in October and November. It starts to dry out a little bit in December, and then it gets a little even more concerning in January. February is slightly better in some places on the strength of just 2 storms, and March in most cases was the driest ever recorded. And through the end of May, year-to-date precipitation fell short of average, especially so in northern and central Nevada along the coast and in the southern part of the inland desert. A few places along the central coast, Sacramento Valley and northern Mojave came in above average, and the transverse ranges did exceptionally well. And these grids are showing total precipitation, not just snow, and that's the more important part. October continued last year's trends of below to near average temperatures, and then beginning in November, it began getting very warm. The monthly average of daily mean temperatures for most of Nevada came in at least 6 degrees warmer than average. In December, that expanded to most non-Central Valley locations, again with Nevada leading the way, this time at least 9 degrees warmer than average. January and February settled down a little for both states, and then March, nearly the entire area of both states was at least 9 degrees warmer than average. And I'm stressing the average there because of just how hot the middle of the month was. On the right, we have the CNRFC's forecast departure from normal daily high temperatures on March 19th. And there are a lot of areas that are more than 20 degrees above average, and even worse, the white areas were forecast more than 25 degrees above normal for that day. After that, April seemed like a huge relief in most places. Temperatures generally returned to near normal. Northern California and Nevada saw above normal precipitation, and April can historically bring some decent totals with more than 15 inches along the wettest parts of the North Coast and up to about a foot in the Sierra and the Cascades. The bad news is that pales compared to the deficit we had already dug for the rest of the season, compared with the rest of the year or the rest of the winter, where we see our biggest totals, April averages never account for more than 45%, and that's an extreme outlier in south central Nevada there. May, more of a mixed bag, especially in the north. Temperatures returned to above normal. Precipitation remained mostly above normal again, especially in the north. But as with April, May normal for precipitation is quite a bit less than the months immediately preceding. One of the bigger problems with all of this is how early the snow water equivalent peaked. It's really not unusual at all to have peak SWE arrive before April 1st. For the 1991 to 2020 period, I calculated the average date for Nevada at March 25th and for California at March 20th. This year, the statewide average in both states peaked in late February, and that is unusual. Nevada's statewide average peaked on February 23rd, which is tied for the earliest date since 1991. California was 1 day later, and that's the third earliest in the same time frame. In California, the early years were 2022, when February to April were very dry, but we didn't see anything near the speed of the mountain runoff that we did this year. And the other was 2015, which was the lowest statewide average we ever recorded. And when I presented last, we at the CNRFC were forecasting that we would fall below the 2015 snowpack within a week. That never happened, but it's not much of a consolation. This chart is showing the range of historical statewide SWE from the daily reporting snow pillows. On any given day, there's about a 10% chance of SWE falling in the blue area over the period of record. Going down the color bands, we have 25%, 75%, and 90%. The bright green line is the 50% chance. The orange at the bottom is 2015. The black is this year, and the pink is 2014. From March to late April, California's statewide average SWE was between two of the driest years on record, and from late April, it was a very, very close match to what we had in 2014. Additionally concerning is the early melt. We are now looking at a 30-year average of the dates when all of the snow pillows reach zero SWE across each region, and that's usually in May to June, with the southern Nevada and central Sierra as the outliers. And then this year, when I made this image, the Central Sierra still had 2 sites that were showing some snow. Every other region has melted out. And in every case, that's more than 2 weeks ahead of the 1991 to 2020 average date. And in most cases, it's closer to a month, if not more. Moving into the future, the big news is the forecast El Nino. As of the May issuance, the Climate Prediction Center has a 92% chance of El Nino being in place for the July to August period. There is a bit of a misconception there that this means above average precipitation for all of California. And that is more often than not true in the southern part of the state. If we go back to 1950, though, we've had 25 El Nino years on the statewide level. 15 of those have coincided with above average precipitation, while 10 have been below average. And if we narrow that to snow, it's an almost even split, 13 wet, 12 dry. And more importantly for this discussion, the effects are much lesser during the summer. The most recent CPC outlook for the June to July August period lines up with just that, shows equal chances of above and below average precipitation across both states. It's also worth pointing out just how dry those months are here. Nearly the entire region receives on average less than 2.5 inches total over those 3 months, and a very large portion receives less than about a ½ inch. Even if this El Nino does produce above average precipitation this summer, it really isn't enough to stave off any fire concerns. And when you add in the temperature look, that becomes even more obvious. The entire region has at least a 40% chance of above average temperatures throughout the summer, and the probability is greater in Northern California. Especially concerning is that there's a good overlap between the areas with the highest chance of above average temperatures and where the snowpack was worst this winter. Those same areas were the first to melt out this year, and the same which already had above average temperatures in May. Especially in the Klamath Basin in northern Nevada, the soils have had more time to dry out. As of the most recent issuance of the Drought Monitor, all of Nevada has returned to at least abnormally dry conditions, most of the state in moderate to severe drought. California is currently better, though much of the state is now abnormally dry as we enter the summer. And then this image is looking at the burn severity perimeters of all wildfires across the 2 states since 2017. The lighter greens tend to be the lower burn severities. The warmer colors, the oranges, reds, yellows, are going to be the higher intensities. We started seeing a trend in increased intensity in the mid-20 teens. Most of these displayed here came before the big water year of 2023, which is concerning because we do have some extra fuels from that period, and there's still a very large area which has not had a big fire in a very long time. In summation, we did have that wet fall. Winter dried out very quickly in an extreme manner. Spring was fairly mixed. And going into the summer, we're looking at another hot one, and we've already got drought conditions returning to both California and Nevada. And that is going to be the end of everything I've got for today.
Thanks, Mike. Just to remind folks, go ahead and keep entering your questions. I don't see any quite at the moment for quick questions, but we'll do more at the end. With that, Jim, I'll pass it over to you to talk more about the fire outlook. Jim, are you there, able to unmute yourself and potentially share your slides? Oh, there we go.
Yeah, do you hear me now?
Yes, and then we can see your slides, so you should be good to go.
Okay, it's got the full screen version.
Yes.
Okay, so thanks, Mike. Mike covered a lot of things that I was going to cover, just kind of an overview, and he did a really good job. So I'm going to, kind of tie it in and how it's going to impact what we're seeing this year. So what I did is kind of just looking about how warm everything was, just kind of put it across the country, but just so you get an idea, so it's not just California, Nevada. Even though it's just we're focusing on that here, it does affect other areas in the country, and that can also affect our fire season because of the competition for resources. But as we know, it was record warm 6-month period from November through April across much of the West, but including Nevada and California. So just keep that in mind. And then looking at the precipitation, which kind of Mike went over, it was kind of wet in the fall, and that was really good for grass growth, and I'll have more on the slide here in a minute, but that enabled the soil moisture to be increased there into some areas. Although as you get into Nevada, it was a little bit drier overall, and that helped to limit the amount of grass growth we had there. But as Mike has mentioned, it's been kind of wet there. There were some really good grass crops there from 2024 and 2025 they are still dealing with. So despite the blown-on precipitation there that did not allow much grass growth so far this spring, there is still plenty of grass there. But in California, in portions of Southern California as well, we have some pretty good conditions for grass growth just because it was wet in the fall into the early winter. Just walking like I said, the peak winter snowpack, Mike already hit this quite a bit, but I'm just kind of focusing on that, what that heat wave did in mid to late March, just really decimating the snowpack. Now, while the melt off date, is when you have the last station that does not have any more SWE, in a lot of practical purposes across what we're looking at for fire and a lot of mid to low elevations and even some of the higher elevations, kind of showing this on the next slide here, from the especially in the Humboldt Basin, it pretty much first touched zero in late March. And that's the date we're more concerned with fire, even though you have little bumps from systems that come through in April into early May, that comes off fast. So now what you're doing is you're essentially exposing the fuels earlier to the conditions. And so in a lot of the timbered areas, that's really important because now your heavier fuels, your 1,000-hour fuels, your 100 to 1,000-hour fuels, which are like your heavier down logs, they are able to dry out a lot faster when they're exposed to the elements earlier. The only exception is if you're somehow able to keep, excessive, humidity, kind of like you do close to the coast. But in the inland basins, you're being exposed that much earlier is a huge concern. And then also looking just up into the Klamath Basin is another example. Mike was talking about 2015 with that early meltout. This is just one of the areas that it did, was at the record low there as well, but also that very low snowpack. And that snow you're seeing was really only at the highest elevations. So now we have a lot of our mid elevations there. And one important thing about the Klamath Basin is it's a lot of the, the heavier continuous timber across both states, especially in California. And with terrain there, it's a little bit more remote and it's very, very difficult to fight fire there. And so any fires that we get going there tend to be a very long duration if they get established with any size. So just looking, May, we did have some pockets of near to above normal precipitation, as Mike already mentioned, but it stayed dry in northern Nevada, so we didn't really have any grass growth. And then just looking at the temperatures as well, quite, above normal across, Northern California and Nevada. But as you went to the south or close to the coast, it was closer to normal. But aside from those areas, like pockets of heavier, precipitation was just near to slightly above normal. It was quite dry, and as Mike had already mentioned, we are getting into the dry season climatologically. So aside from, so most areas, the one exception is actually in portions of northeast Nevada into central Nevada. May is actually the wettest month, especially around the Ely area. So for this anomaly to show up there is significant there, especially for the timbered areas that did not have much of a snowpack this winter. So looking at the fine fuel loading, I kind of took the national graphic, just kind of gives you, this is the herbaceous graphic, and this was last updated about 3 weeks ago, but it gives you a good idea of what happened across the state. In the north, in some of the areas that are primarily the grass growing areas, you had good conditions for grass growth, so we're seeing deviations above normal in much of the northern half of the state. Let's go into Southern California. It was a little bit more localized as to where you had favorable grass growth. It's generally near normal, maybe a lot of continuous grass, but maybe not as tall as it was in previous years. So just kind of what we've been hearing is it's more kind of like localized areas of that above normal that you're seeing here. Let's go over into Nevada, especially the northern half, where we're more worried about the grass growth there. Conditions were not as good there. So we haven't grown as much grass. It was very sparse, incomplete in some areas there. And then kind of looking here on the right, that graph, that's from the Browns Valley Station in the Sierra foothills of Northern California. And what it's showing there is that 3-year average line, it was the second most ever recorded, the most being in 2018. Where we had record grass growth. But this is, not only do we have a good grass crop this year, but the last 2 years were also above normal, and some of that is still standing there. Turning our attention back to Nevada, despite the below normal grass growth there, this is an example from Western Nevada in the Virginia mountains to the east of Reno, where all that grass is all the carryover mixed in, and it's still, in many areas 2 feet tall from the last 2 years. So that's still standing, and it's across much of the northern half of the state. So that creates good conditions for rapidly moving fires and continuous fuels. The other thing that to mention is for Nevada, with coming from the Great Basin, is their biggest fire seasons tend to be the first dry year after 1 or 2 wet years, which is what we've been seeing now from especially the last 3 years have been fairly good for grass growth. This year being the first drier year, not as much grass growth, we have all the standing. And what ends up happening now is we are curing those fuels earlier, especially in the sagebrush. We're seeing record low fuel moistures in the sagebrush because of the dry spring in much of the Great Basin and much of Nevada now. So a lot of these finer fuels are already becoming available to burn, and the sage is going to be beginning to contribute here shortly if it isn't already in some areas, probably around Carson City, where some of the sagebrush fuel moisture is below 100%. It is starting to contribute to fire growth in that area, and we're starting to see some of the large areas, 1,000 acres or more. But to give an example, we haven't really had the starts in northern Nevada yet, but just to the north in southern Idaho, where conditions are largely similar, there's a lot of grass growth from previous years. Although this year they did have a wet April, so there's even more grass growth, but that's already curing. We're already seeing in parts of southern Idaho numerous fires of 1 to 10,000 acres already this spring, which is just very, very early. So kind of looking again at the monthly temperature outlooks that Mike already showed, just looking for the rest of this month, below normal precipitation, much of the northern half of the west, above normal. This is starting to look a little bit more concerning here in about 10 days, 7 to 10 days, with a ridge building off the coast. Temperatures are likely to become well above normal in the Pacific Northwest and California. So that'll further dry fuels there, with temperatures possibly, exceeding 90 degrees for several days in Portland and possibly even Seattle, whereas temperatures in some of the lower elevations of California will likely exceed 100 degrees starting late this week into early next week. The good thing is just looking up to the southwest and above normal potential for the monsoon. That's good there, but we're not going to see anything here in California, Nevada. So just watching those temperatures there just warm up in the northwest is going to be a concern here, and that really set the stage if anything comes on the backside, especially if we were to see any dry lightning. Looking ahead to the rest of the season, like Mike already showed, the monsoon looking pretty good is not necessarily going to be a good thing out here. A lot of times we're on the fringes. Maybe in Southern California it can have a bit more of an impact, especially if it's a deeper surge into the southern half of the Sierra. But the northern half of the state into much of Nevada and northern Nevada, we tend to be on the fringes, have to worry about dry lightning, given the state of the fields, how continuous they are. That is going to be a big concern. One other thing to kind of keep in mind too is the Pacific hurricane outlook is above normal. That is a double-edged sword. If the storm tracks are close to the coast where the storms don't decouple before the moisture comes in, and it's a favorable track to come up farther coast, kind of like Hurricane Hillary did in 2023, we can actually greatly improve the summer outlook. But that's something we'll have to see. Right now, we're just looking at trends. We can't count on that right now. So, but that there is that potential. But the other potential is that the storms, any hurricanes that try to move north, they go farther off the coast, they decouple. So all we get is the mid and high level moisture when it comes in. And the bad news with that, we can get lightning outbreaks similar to what we had in 2020 or say even 2008, where we have these historic lightning outbreaks on top of very dry fuels, and fire season goes from like 10 miles an hour to well over 100 within a matter of a day or two. So that's a concern there as we go ahead toward the summer. So looking at the outlook, I kind of shown the national outlook, just so you get an idea. It's not just focused on California and Nevada, but just looking ahead to this month. In eastern Nevada, we are worried about the carryover grasses and into northeast and into some of the timbered areas. We have not highlighted the rest of northern or western Nevada. That'll probably be to the latter half of summer, but I would not be surprised that really to see above normal conditions develop here very shortly. As far as California, we are expecting that early start to the season, where you've already seen larger fires than normal in much of May across central and southern California. And we expect that to continue at least for the lower elevations in the Sierra foothills, maybe closer to the coast as well for June. And then into Northern California, just watching everything come on here for the latter half of the month, going above normal. As we head into July, we're going to keep most of the area for Northern California above normal, and then most of northern and eastern Nevada in July above normal as well. Some of the timbered areas and also a lot of the grass growth there. The areas in that central and southwest Nevada, there's typically not a lot of as much fuel there, so it becomes more sparse. So we're not seeing the fuel loading there. We only see those in exceptional years, and this is not one of them. So just kind of keeping those areas normal. In Southern California, what we're banking on is a more normal season. Maybe there would be enough influence from the monsoon that we get a little bit of moisture at times to keep things normal. Now, keep in mind that's generally quite active for the central coast mountains and much of the Sierra as well. We start to get into an active season. So it's just saying we're not expecting those conditions to be above normal. But as you see kind of to the north and east, it's not just California and Nevada, it's spreading across much of the Northwest and into much of the Four Corners as well. And then into August, continuing those areas in northern Nevada and northern California, expecting those areas in eastern Nevada to have enough of an influence from the monsoon to keep them closer to normal. Generally, August tends to be a quieter month across central and southern Nevada, where we get a lot of fires, but they tend not to be a lot of larger fires. Those larger fires tend to happen in northern and western Nevada, with all the grass there and the drier conditions in the mountains as well, expecting the above normal conditions, and then into much of northern California as well. And similar to July in central and southern California, still expecting an active season, but not necessarily above normal, expecting it. The monsoon will be strong enough and close enough that we'll have a couple pulses to at least keep things close to normal and not getting out of hand. And then as we get into September, just looking ahead there, keeping those same areas for northern Nevada, western Nevada along the Sierra front and into Northern California above normal as well. Just expecting that, these drier conditions probably will last into September. Our fire seasons traditionally have been going a little bit longer. We've been seeing these seasons stretch often into December, sometimes October. In the case of Northern California, occasionally into November, as we saw in 2018 with the Camp Fire. But those are more dependent on the offshore conditions setting up. With us heading into a potentially strong El Nino, that looks less likely to happen, but at least in September, we're expecting it to be above normal just because we're dealing with all these historically or near historically dry conditions. A lot of the fuel moistures that we're hearing already are at record lows for the time of year. The 1,000-hour fuels in many locations in Northern California and Northern Nevada are also near or at or exceeding historic lows for this time of year. So that's why we're so concerned about this for the summer, especially the northern halves of the state. So that's all I have for today to add on the fire outlook, and thank you. And I'll be around for questions.
Great, thanks, Tim. As I mentioned, go ahead and people can enter in their questions. Let me bring up the reminder of how that works. So the only question that's come in so far, but I of course have a few myself as well. And this one goes back to Mike to start with, and it asks, how has NSOW strength historically correlated with snowpack?
Let me bring that slide back up.
Yeah, I can stop sharing. You can go ahead.
Okay. I think when I did my chart, I did not look specifically at the strength. Let me see. Yeah, I did not, but if anybody wants to, if I need to get back to anybody later on that, I can easily do that. I've got the data, I just did not put it on here. From the top of my head, I know that 2016, 2024 were supposed to be very strong El Niños, and they sat fairly close to average.
Okay. I know this is something that we've been talking about over here at Nidus a little bit on that. And this person is asking for your email, Mike. So maybe you want, is it at the end of your slides? Maybe he can reach out to you. We've been thinking about this, what the correlations are, and I don't have those figures at my fingertips right now either. Let me go back to sharing. Here we go. Those are the only questions we have so far, but I will remind folks, here's how you can enter questions. Just go ahead and find the apps or Slido button and then enter them in there. We have plenty of time for questions. I will mention that our next webinar is actually not going to be till September. We're going to be hosting several summer Western drought briefings this summer and drought status updates for California, Nevada in lieu of that webinar. But I'll give folks a couple minutes more for questions, but maybe I'll ask one myself here. And maybe this one's for both of you or perhaps for Jim, is one of the speakers we were hoping potentially to have on this webinar, but we'll likely have in September, is about evaporative demand or the evaporative demand drought index. And just thinking about, especially if we're going to have warmer temperatures this summer, above normal temperatures or things like that, how that may play a role here, or what people should be thinking about with that. And I guess I'm just more putting it out there, a question for you all is how does that factor into what we may see this summer and going forward with both either from the river forecast side or from the fire side?
I can speak to that as far as what we look for on the fire side.
Great.
With the evaporative demand and looking at like vapor pressure deficit, it is important and can contribute. However, for like a lot of your dead in down fuels like your fine grasses that are already available or your dead and down fuels, that is still more of a function of humidity. What we look for with that high evaporative demand, especially when we see our heat waves, is the heat stress in the live fuels, where a lot of these fuels will go dormant prematurely if we see it, and become a lot of live fuels become more stressed. So that's really important for the live fuels. And on the backside of these, periods of excessive heat is when we often see our increases of activity because the fuels are that more stressed, especially in the live fuels.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, and on our end, it really does not come into play too much. Our primary goals being the actual forecast of the rivers and water supply. It's not a big factor in our models.
Great. A couple more questions came in. Mike, someone's just asking about the soil burn severity map you had, if it was available online, or did you generate that yourself?
That's one of mine, but the data is all available online. I got that from the Monitoring Trends and Burn Severity website.
Great. I'll suggest they follow up with you if they want more information. And then for Jim, there's a question. Can you explain the grass crop and how it relates to germination? I've heard warm rain in soils promotes germination. Is that true? Like fall/spring versus winter?
Yeah, generally you want to have enough precipitation in the soils and then have the warmer temperatures in the spring. A lot of times fall precipitation, because it does allow to get deeper in the soil. If it's not abundant and we don't have cold temperatures like we had warmer than normal temperatures, the soil moisture, due to evaporation, does slowly bleed out, although it's not like in midsummer. But we saw that even though we had some pretty wet conditions in northern Nevada from November to December, there wasn't as much there. But whereas it was more continuous in California, so once you had the warmer soils, that soil moisture was abundant. Once we got to March and April, we had abundant growth. So it is a function of both of it. And so we want to see that near to above normal soil moisture at the time, the soils become conducive for growth. And that typically happens in spring, earlier in your lower elevations.
Great. So there's not any other questions right at the moment. Maybe I'll build on that a little bit. I was writing down and thinking as you were presenting, Jim, about mentioning with the monsoon. And I'm just sort of thinking about, like, if you could tell us a little bit more about, as we're going forward, what could go wrong this summer, perhaps. So obviously right now we're hoping the monsoon, we're cautious about it. But what could that mean, and how, maybe if it's related to the fuels or soil moisture, things like that. Could you add a little bit more there?
I could. So one of the things that's done with the research in the Southwest when they look at the monsoon is they look to have like a period of, heat before the monsoon hits, typically in June. That typically gets your monsoon circulation going. And so, we're starting to see that. One thing, there's also been some recent papers about the sea surface temperatures off the coast of Mexico, which can be conducive, if they're above normal, can be conducive to a wet monsoon. We have those conditions this year. And so that's all thinking like, okay, we can go to normal. However, there's also a correlation, although somewhat weaker, is that during a mature El Nino, the monsoon circulation tends to be more disrupted. It tends to come in weaker. So that's something that's kind of fighting everything. However, that's typically on the backside of an El Nino. When we come out of it, we're going into it. And so the correlations aren't that strong. The other thing is, I don't think Mike hit it, but this has been something coming out of the Climate Prediction Center is, this rapid transition is something we haven't seen. So how does this all play out over the summer on the lead into the summer? That's kind of lowering our confidence a bit as far as the impacts with this El Nino. We feel a lot more confident as we go into the winter. Although as Mike just referred to, as we get to the winter, like the last two strong El Ninos didn't quite produce the above normal precipitation that we've historically seen, such as in 97, 98, or 82, 83. there it's been a little bit closer to normal. So just, you know, we're kind of, everything's pointing that in that direction for an above normal monsoon, starting to see the moisture in Mexico now, which is a good sign. But we don't know how, you know, if it's going to be somewhat disrupted as the El Nino strengthens. That remains to be seen.
Great, thank you for answering my question. It's a lot of great information, and I'm getting a lot of people are just as curious as I was some of the things you're answering. The last question I guess I have, maybe before we close it, if no more come in, is for Mike. I was thinking along the lines here at Nidas, we've been talking a lot about the type of year we've had this year, and some of the potential outcomes as we go through the summer and potential fall, waiting for like the next season to start. Do you have any sense of what you guys are hearing on the ground for potential impacts over the summer? What people are keeping an eye out for, maybe on that hydrologic time scale, or do we think we still have a little bit of time and just have to wait and see for the fall?
Yeah, definitely. It's very dynamic. Precipitation is very hard to predict more than about 10 days in advance. We can tell you it'll probably be very quiet and dry in the summer, but that's just climatologically speaking.
Mm-hmm.
For the most part, reservoirs this year entered the season near full. I can tell you Folsom up the stream from us here in Sacramento is still very near full. That's the rare bit of good news that I have for this one here, but it's just going to be how much demand there is over the summer.
Great, thanks, Mike. With that, I still don't see any more questions coming in. I'll give a chance. Speakers, would you like to add anything else before I go ahead and close?
Yeah, I was just going to share my email if you'd like.
Oh yeah, go ahead. You can do you want to do it in chat, or would you like to just say it out loud? Either way.
I'll type it into the chat just for sake of ease.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, with that, I'll go ahead and wrap up. If you do think of any more questions along the way or over the summer, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, and I can either answer your question or get them to the folks that can answer your question. Thank you, Mike and Jim, for your great presentations today. As a reminder, the recording of this webinar will be available on drought.gov and the Nidas YouTube channel later this week. And as I mentioned, our next webinar will be in September due to some other communications we have going on over the summer. If you'd like to continue to receive our regional emails or our national emails, go to the QR code and feel free to sign up for our different newsletters and information and things like that. With that, I'll say thanks everyone for joining us today and hope you have a good week, and I'll close the webinar. Thank you.